Hello everyone, this is the third mini seminar in our series that talks about microbes in the environment. Today's presentation title is Cyanobacteria Blooms in Our Backyard. I'm Sibel Bargu. I'm a professor in the Department of Oceanography and Coastal Sciences at Louisiana State University. Before we start talking about cyanobacteria blooms, let's start with the algal blooms in general. Algae is a common term that is used for organisms, aquatic organisms, that are capable of doing photosynthesis like land plants do. Some of them look like land plants, as you can see in this image, but they don't have actual roots and leaves. Many of the algae looks like this. They are single-cell microscopic organisms that are also capable of doing photosynthesis, like these macroalgae does, and as well as the land plants do. Algal blooms occur when favorable environmental conditions like lights and nutrients promote algae to grow rapidly. In many cases, these optimum conditions occurs in the springtime, and that's the time we call these growth of algae a spring bloom. When they do grow, they produce oxygen and build up carbon that is needed for bigger organisms that consume them to grow, like small fish, crabs, and shrimp. Algae usually occurs naturally in a system, and sometimes they are introduced species. They're introduced by currents, ballast waters, and aquacultures. In any cases, when they establish themselves in an aquatic environment, they start growing as soon as the resources they need is available to them. And when they grow, either they are eaten by organisms or they grow, die, and sink to the bottom. It's part of a natural process, and it's needed because their production feeds many organisms living in these systems, and they're relying on their productivity overall. So algal blooms is a good thing, and we do need to see them periodically in the system to support these environments. However, this growth sometimes becomes excessive due to increasing nutrient introduction or availability, and those are the times we start seeing these harmful effects. The landscapes of many watersheds are occupied mostly by humans and influenced by their activities. As the human population increases, that increase itself is degrading the quality of the water. To be able to support human population and address the need for economical growth, humans have altered landscapes and caused degradation in the water quality, losses of wetlands, and also increases in transportation of nutrients to these basins, estuarine and freshwater systems or coastal systems. In many cases, this increase in nutrient is causing eutrophication, in other words, degradation of water quality, and typical symptoms of eutrophication can include hypoxia, reduction of oxygen, harmful algal blooms, which we will speak in a minute, and reduction of benthic biomass and biodiversity, and negative effect on fishery and seafood industries, as well as on fishermen and coastal state economies. Harmful algal blooms is very similar to algal blooms. It's a growth of algae. However, this is the time we call it harmful algal blooms because most of the cases, there's an overgrowth of algae that can affect the water quality negatively or may cause harm to organisms. So any algal blooms that are associated with any kind of harm, we call it as clearly harmful algal blooms. When the algae is very, very abundant or is abundant for a long period of time, then we start seeing some negative impacts. One of the most obvious one is the discoloration of the water. Sometimes they turn water into red, brown, or green. That comes due to their pigments inside of cells. And when there are so many, they change the color of the water. But when they are very abundant, they can also block the sunlight and shade organisms that live under the surface, or they can deplete oxygen due to their own excessive respiration or the decomposition of this organic matter by other microbes. Or some of them have these spines that can cause mechanical irritation and damage fish gills. In many cases, these abundance and these negative impacts can end up with fish kills and other organism deaths or illnesses that can occur in the system. Some of these algae, not all the species, but some of them are also capable of producing toxin. And the toxin production can be detrimental for any organisms directly consuming them, or organisms, bigger organisms, or even humans that consume the contaminated food. Toxic cyanobacteria blooms are very similar to other harmful algal blooms. Obviously, when we do see toxic cyanobacteria blooms, some of the negative impacts are very similar. These are cyanobacteria images. They are like other algae. They are single cell organisms. They live either in big chains or colonies. And they do photosynthesis like algae does or land plants do. However, they are not algae. They are bacteria. But the one very important common feature between cyanobacteria and algae is they both do photosynthesis. So in many cases, they're kind of grouped together. And very similarly to other harmful algae, they also change the color of the water to this blue-green coloration. And therefore, sometimes people call them blue-green algae, even they are not actually algae. In many cases, we do know about them, either from articles in the newspapers or a sign at the beach that's warning for people to not have a direct contact with water, or sometimes we see these domestic animal deaths on the shores. And unfortunately, these are the ways that we get exposed, but they are everywhere. They can live in fresh water, in marine coastal systems, in open ocean, in the desert, in the moist soil, and the glaciers. So they're everywhere. However, in many cases, we are more aware of them due to these visual either signs or color, or these animals that's unfortunately that can be shown on the shores. Sorry, here we go. Toxic cyanobacteria blooms are usually associated with freshwater systems or estuarine systems. This group of cyanobacteria has a very seasonal distribution. They prefer warm temperatures and calm waters. They don't like turbulence. So in many cases, this fresh or low salinity, less turbidity, calm and high temperature environments corresponds to summertime. Of course, they also need nutrients to grow. However, some of these toxic cyanobacteria species are capable of utilizing atmospheric nitrogen. It's called nitrogen fixation, or they can store some of the nutrients that they may need. And because of these abilities, they are good competitors even at low nutrient conditions. So this image shows these black columns are cyanobacteria. As you can see, their appearance corresponds to summer and early fall, and then other groups of algae can take over during winter and spring more turbid environments. And the toxins they produce can be more than one type. And depending on the impact in humans, these cyanotoxins can be categorized into broader groups. Hepatotoxins affect the liver. Neurotoxins affect the nervous system. Dermatoxins are skin and respiratory irritants, and endotoxins are gastrointestinal irritants. In addition to nutrient dynamics and their toxicity, physical parameters can be equally important to determine their distribution, their toxicity, and impact on the environment. This is an image from Louisiana coastal waters. This is a Breton Sound estuary, and this is Mississippi River. When during high flow conditions, river water can be diverted into these estuaries. When that happens, these freshwater systems in the upper estuary and the organisms living in this area can be pushed down to estuary where salinities are a little higher and the conditions not as optimum as the upper estuarine areas. However, cyanobacteria are known to be tolerant to higher salinities, so they can be successfully sustaining their biomass in even lower estuary areas, and they can be food for organisms like oyster. This is an experiment that shows oyster grazing on a toxic cyanobacteria. And when that happens, then these organisms can be contaminated, and whoever consumes them, including humans, can become sick. So therefore, physical transportation of these algae sometimes can be equally important or risky as much as the nutrient availability for these organisms to grow in any given system. What we're going to do if we suspect a cyanobacteria algal bloom? Color is a good clue to be suspicious, and sometimes they also smell not very good. So when you do see discoloration or you smell something not very pleasant, stay away and keep your pets away from the water and avoid contact and consumption for sure. And usually there is more into it that you can inform yourself by contacting your state agency like Department of Environmental Quality. Don't ignore, don't pollute, but be informed. Just to stay safe, you need to inform yourself so that you know what to do in the right time. And don't forget, enjoy the nature. So this ends our presentation today, but we have one more to go. This is all our seminars in this series. This was the third one we just finished. Join us for the next and the last discussion called benthic microbes and their role in reducing coastal erosion by Dr. Giulio Moriarty. Until then, goodbye.